Shalom, everybody, and Chodesh Tov. Today is the first day of the month of Kislev, and we are delighted to be with you. Myself, I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin. I'm the founder and spiritual leader of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, and I'm going to invite my two dear friends to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, the founder of Keeping It Sacred, keepingitsacred.com. We are an international community of people who are studying text and engaging in ritual that's accessible, relevant, and empowering. Great to be here.
Shalom, rabbis. It's nice to see you. It's nice to share this virtual room with you. I'm Nico Socolovsky. I am the rabbi of Temple Beth Tikvah, and I'm excited to discuss with you Parashat Toldot, which is almost my favorite Torah portion. I say almost because next week is Bayetze, and it's my bar mitzvah's portion. So I always get excited in Toldot, but Bayetze is almost there. Now, the word Toldot, first let's clarify the meaning of the word. The word Toldot in Hebrew means history, stories, and can I share with you a little side story?
Please.
About Jewish conspiracies?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So when I grew up in Argentina, I heard several times scholars trying to make some connections between the Spanish language, the time of the crypto Jews in Spain, and how the Spanish Jewry, that was a very strong community, influenced the development of the society in Spain. And so there's a city in Spain that was central for Jewish life, and it's the city of Toledo.
Holy Toledo.
And there are those that say that the name of the city of Toledo comes from the word Toldot.
Beautiful.
Now, the conspiracy goes all the way to Barcelona, and has to do with this idea that there was a huge trade of Barcel, which means iron. So there's a Jewish connection almost everywhere, at least for us.
Wow.
We are somehow connected to many things. So let's get started to talk about Parashat Toldot. What did you bring? What are you thinking about?
Well, I'll just say I've always been fascinated by the Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, and Esau family, and I will say that for me personally, when I read the text, certainly at face value, not with the contextual midrashim that were sort of later brought in to maybe justify certain paths of history, but I would just say that Esau to me is one of the most misunderstood and compassionate characters in the Torah, and I actually think of him and refer to him a lot in sort of my own counseling as someone who I more than misunderstood, but I'd love to know what you guys think about Esau in particular, and I know that connects to his mother and his father, etc.
I mean, I don't think you can talk about this question without hearing his sobs and his cries when he hears that Isaac, their father, has given Jacob, his younger brother, not only the birthright that he kind of traded for a bowl of red lentils, but that Isaac has now given his younger brother the blessing, the one blessing to his brother. He sobs, he wails, he cries. I don't think that I've seen that kind of catharsis and just raw emotion until generation later, when Joseph cries at the reunification with his brothers, and it says that all of Egypt heard his sobs.
Right.
So there's that compassion, right? He's painted as a man of the field, as someone with a quiver and bow always by his side, that someone who likes to hunt game. And then we have this situation where he just breaks down that shell of an exterior and allows the well springs of his heart and his soul to come out of his eyes through tears, right? There's a saying that maybe the Moshiach won't come, Messiah won't come until he stops crying, right? At that kind of, how can we as a Jewish people claim that we have ascended and we have taken this blessing, but we can't deny it's at the expense of another human being. And so I too feel that compassion for Esau. And it's interesting because I was reading this story with my two young sons, and one of them is red and hairy, and he's the older one, and one of them is younger and smooth. And it was just very interesting to see their expression of it. And the redheaded one said, like, Jacob's a liar, right? Like that he stole this birthright. And so even he could see the injustice that was done to Esau.
And ultimately that ties into something that the three of us were talking about before, which is just the complex nature of their parents, the unusual dynamic between Isaac and Rebecca, and in particular, her role in the unfolding of history.
I want to answer to your previous question. I was thinking about this idea that Esau is a misunderstood character. And I think that actually his parents, particularly Isaac, understand him very well, very, very well. When the text says that Isaac loved Esau, and then the description is that he had side befiv, had hunting in his mouth. The Midrash says that his speech was hunting, that he was actually well-versed. He was all the time kind of explaining himself, like a child that is out there and, super active and to some extent very raw. And what Rabbi Sachs says about that, and I think is beautiful, is that Isaac knew who his son was, and as opposed to his father, to Abraham, he wasn't willing to sacrifice that son, and therefore he loved him. He loved him unconditionally, knowing who he was. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
Oh, yes. And doesn't it make you think about, which I often do also, how much Abraham loved Ishmael? And that's why that's one of the ways to understand when God says, God puts him to the test and says, you're going to need to sacrifice your son. Your son, I have two, the one who you love, I love them both, Isaac. That you really understand that that both men, both Abraham and Isaac, love both their children. And it's then that sort of enters in the important, I guess, function of their wives in what happens to the family.
Let me take what you are saying and say that it's not only about Abraham loving Ishmael. Actually, the loving figure in my reading of this story, if you go back to the story of Abraham and Ishmael, and then Parashat Hayei Sarah, the life of Sarah that we just read last week, Isaac knows how to love. Isaac is the one who ends up burying his father with his brother. Isaac is the one who apparently, according to the Midrash, goes and reach out to Agar. According to the Midrash, once again, brings her back to accompany his father. So he's taking care of his father. He's reaching out to Agar, and he's keeping in touch with his brother, and he unconditionally loves his child. I think it's a very loving figure. Now, can I invite you one more thing about Esau? When we go on, we know that part of the challenge with him, or maybe what Isaac and Rebecca knew about him, was that he wasn't the figure to continue. He wasn't the right fit for the job. He wasn't the figure to continue with the tradition of the people or to continue with this family chain, but he was beloved. And as a matter of fact, when after Jacob was blessed and took the blessing from Esau, as it is traditionally read, and he was in disguise, and there's a huge question about, was really Isaac unaware of what he was doing? Now, I don't know if Isaac is, so Isaac is described as blind, but I'm not sure that he's the one who is unable to see. Right?
Yeah,
like
at least. Yeah.
and the name Yaakov means follow also. It's not only heal, it's also follow. So I think the story from the beginning is trying to say, try to follow us, because we are going to confuse you quite a bit, and we are going to play with characters. So when later on his parents tell Jacob to run away because he has stolen the blessing from Esau, etc., etc., we see that there are two things that happen. Once, in the context of Esau, one is that Isaac has a blessing for Esau, and a blessing that comes from pure love. It's not the traditional, it's not the formal one, but he's able to create something for his child. He's able to see him in that moment. And I think also he saw Jacob, and the one who couldn't see himself was Jacob. But that's a different story. And another thing is that Rebecca says, Jacob, you need to go away until the anger of your brother goes away. But Rebecca knows that at some point that anger will go away. And as a matter of fact, later on, Jacob is very afraid. Jacob is very preoccupied about the encountering his brother once again. And Esau actually is looking forward to seeing his brother, because Esau is way more connected to his heart and to his life experience than his brother Jacob. To some extent, Esau is way more real. Is way more mature and connected to his emotions.
Heather, what about this Parsha captures your imagination?
I am so interested in always the off the beaten path questions, and part of that is in this story, the digging of the wells. So we have this situation where Jacob gets very big in the city of the Philistines, and he has an abundance of livestock and of a family, and the Philistine king Avimelech says, "Go, you've gotten too big from us," right? The word is actually mimenu. The question is it mimenu like on our account, like Nechama Leibovitz says, or is it mimenu like you've gotten too big for us? I don't know of any contemporary mayor that would send their like wealthiest like person in the land out because they're too big for the city. But this is what Avimelech does, and when Jacob goes out, he goes to the wells that his father had dug, and he finds them filled in. And there's a question of whether the Philistines had actually filled them in because they didn't want him to have that kind of material comfort or that ease of life. So we find Jacob redigging his father's wells. So this idea of you can just picture this like it's like a movie scene, right? You have maybe it's nighttime and he's got his shovel and he's just redigging these wells because there's a famine in the land and it's hot and he needs something to quench his thirst and the thirst of all of his flock. And he's digging these wells and trying to get this sustenance and get it flowing again, this abundance. So this idea of revisiting the threads, like we were just talking about, the threads, the through lines of what happens with the patriarchs of, Abraham sending away Ishmael and keeping Isaac in the fold, and Isaac favoring Jacob, and then Jacob's going to in the future favor Joseph. And so this whole through line, he's revisiting what his fathers were capable of and what their lives were about and some of the defining features of them, and kind of bringing them back up and bringing them back to life. So I think that in the Jewish tradition, it can cut both ways, right? Psychologically, psychosocially, we don't want to always bring back into the picture negative aspects of our parents or, long-standing traditions of our people. We also want to call upon the positive attributes. That's why in the Amidah, the central prayer that we always say, we're saying that, you are the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. We're saying, look, there is a through line here. We are digging these wells up again. We are letting the waters flow, the sacred waters flow, the ma'ayanot flow, so that we can also receive the blessing, the sustenance of Torah, the sustenance of that wellspring that is sure to be there. So spiritually, right, it's taking this physical labor and it's reminding us that spiritually we have these well springs at our fingertips. We just have to work a little bit, scratch the surface, and let the well springs come up to nourish us as well. So at Keeping It Sacred, we always talk about this, the text. Let the text be your nourishment. There's a rabbi during the Black Plague who said that in times of da'aga, go to Agadah. At times of worry, go to Agadah, the stories and the texts of the people, and let those be the nourishment for you. So I think about that at this time of pandemic, right? We can always go dig up the sustenance that has sustained our forebears and be refreshed and renewed and revitalized and invigorated ourselves as well.
That reminds me, first of all, really a wonderful way to help us understand sort of the strange insertion of this story where we hear about the birth of these twins and then suddenly there's a famine and Isaac has to go. And it obviously we hear echoes of Abraham having to relocate himself when there's a famine in Canaan and what happens with his wife. And last week in my little Devar Torah that I send out with my weekly e-blast for the collaborative, I wrote about what I call generational pain. And I was about how you can really see how some of the unresolved issues and good things about Abraham and Sarah are replayed in the lives of Isaac and Rebecca. And then again, in some ways with Jacob and his 4 wives. And I think that what you share about, you can only imagine that after the Akedah, Isaac was probably like, I think I don't want to see my father for a really long time, which is part of the reason you don't actually know how he gets home. We hear that Abraham leaves and goes and settles in Beersheba, and we know that Sarah's in Kiryat Arba. We have no idea how Isaac gets off. We know he's untied, but this poor guy, how does he get home? You'd like to imagine that there's reconciliation and some kind of sort of mature adult relationship between older Isaac and Abraham. But really, Isaac does replay. He lives out his father's life story. Mm. And in a weird way, in a different way, because there's so much more progeny, Jacob does too, by also having one who he loves the more. Does he really love him the more? Again, that begs, Nico, what you were saying about ahava, and that really all the fathers love all their sons, but what does it mean to identify or elevate one over the other? And so I think all of this is really tied in to us understanding how families, you can't escape your history, you can't escape your genetics, and you can't escape the things that impacted you when you were children. And
you can challenge those things, and I think that there is an interesting thing to emphasize here. There are 2 moments that are critical moments in which Isaac is eineno, right? Is absent. One is when his mother dies. His mother dies, and there is Abraham. Isaac is not there. He's somewhere. He's doing something else. And there's another moment when, Abraham tells Eleazar, or his servant, later on named Eleazar, to find a wife for his son Isaac. And then when he actually goes all the way to Bethel in order to find that wife, Isaac is not there and not there. And he is invisible until he connects with Rebekah. The story of the partnership between Isaac and Rebekah is different from the story of partnership between Abraham and Sarah. It's a partnership here. And I think that this partnership goes throughout the entire story. And I think that Isaac and Rebekah are trying to change the patterns that they are bringing from home. Sometimes they do it very successfully. And I think that moment in which the text says that Isaac loved Esau, it's one of those moments in which, as I mentioned earlier, that Rabbi Sachs emphasized that he was going to love his son unconditionally, that he was going to do no sacrifices in terms of his love toward his son. And there are moments, as the story with Abimelech, in which they might not be able to challenge those patterns. I think at the end of the story, they once again challenge these patterns. And there's this question of what Rebekah was doing there. And I want to open Rebekah's character just for a moment, because I think she's one of the most enigmatic and beautiful characters in the entire Torah. She's awesome. Now we learn about Rebekah in Parashat Hayei Sarah, and we learn three things about her, maybe way more than three, but three that I want to share right now. One is that she was able to give water to the camels. Now think about the quantity of gallons that she needed to pull up in order to water those camels. So she was strong and she was beyond kind. Mm. Later on, when she meets Isaac, she became a mother and a sister for him, like a comforting figure for him. She was able to emotionally hold a man that was absolutely broken because of the death of his mother, a terrible conflict with his father. This man was broken, and she was able to hold. And then the third thing, Tashat Elohim. She wants to be pregnant, and things are not working the way they expected it. And she goes to God, and she speaks to God and says, I want to have a child. I don't put me all these children around me playing. Like, she's not going to pour her anger into someone else, into something else. She goes directly to the source and says, that's not what I signed up for. Mm-hmm. That's very strong. And then the rabbinical commentary sometimes tries to somehow showcase her as manipulative. And I don't think that she is manipulative. I think she is steering her life, and she's very active, and she's in partnership with Isaac. I want to say that the scene in which she is technically with Jacob, cheating on Esau and on Isaac. I think that Isaac and Rebekah are working together. And they are acknowledging that there is a song that is, to some extent, I will use this expression with some, but I want to say with humility, that he's in the closet in terms of his full identity of being who is meant to be, and he is to hide. He's afraid. He's afraid of the environment and what that environment could mean for him, and that's the case of Jacob. Esau is out there from the very beginning about everything in his life and trying to somehow please everyone. Now we read that he had a wife and his parents didn't like her, so he gets another wife later on, so maybe his parents will be a bit happier. He's out there. And I think that Isaac and Rebekah are all the time in communication, understanding what each of his children need without making sacrifices. And maybe the only sacrifice that they make is the one of their own relationship with their children for the sake of their well-being.
Let me ask, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Kathleen.
was going to say, looking at it through that lens, I love that lens that you're sharing. If we look at it through that lens, we can also go back to Rebecca steering her own life when she finally meets Isaac and she falls off her camel and they ask her, like, is this the guy you want to be with? Like, where in the Bible does it ever say
It's also, right?
a
Like,
woman is given the choice? She like, oh, your opinion actually matters. Like, she had the respect, she had, the ability to speak her own truth and her own choice. Whatever is freedom if it isn't the ability to choose for yourself, to predetermine your own destiny? She chose that as well. So I love her for that as well. I'm just as in love with Rebecca as you are. As far as that goes, right? She was also, they said that she was beautiful. I think that if she was steering it, and we do know she had this spiritual life because, like you said, she was able to speak directly to God. She might have also seen the spirituality of Jacob and Esau, right? The rabbis cast each of them. You can also, right, if we want to go to an accusatory place around Esau, I already shared the beauty of him and the humanity of him. But if we want to look at him through a different lens and see him as always being preoccupied with the physical world, with the hunting, the game, the brute force, whereas Jacob had a more delicate touch. And there's a spirituality in that. And maybe she, like you said, is working with Isaac to kind of direct the line toward the longer range, the truth of spirituality, right? So there was deceit in this portion, but emet, the word for truth, is spelled with 3 letters, aleph, mem, taf, and that's like A to Z and the letter M in the middle, right? Like from A to Z, truth is just apparent, and she wanted to steer it toward this truth of spirituality, and she and Isaac working together to do that. I love that idea. Thank you.
I'll actually offer even a different take on this, though. I think that kindred spirits find each other, and there is no question in my mind that for all of her greatness, Rebecca is equally complicated. I've learned something from both of you today that I really hadn't thought about, but just not only her sheer strength of character, like as you were referring to when Eliezer comes and meets the family and explains what's going on, and the natural, I guess, the natural course of events was that she'd actually sort of, even if she agreed to marry Isaac, she would have stayed home, sort of got her act together a little bit, and sort of the caravan would have followed in a few months, or whatever the protocol would have been in that Semitic culture. And she says, no, I'm going right now on her own. And she ain't that old. So even as a young woman, she's obviously, physically dynamic, emotionally sophisticated. And I think you're right. I mean, again, there's even thoughts that, her recognition that, Isaac himself, that she is going to be the beloved of a man who's really been through the ringer and give him that love and support he needs. So all of that I agree with. But, in a very interesting way, we find at the beginning of Toldot, when basically, the children struggled in her womb, and she said, Im kain lama ze anochi, which in my translation in the Eitz Chaim is, if so, why do I exist? But really, she's like, what? There's a question. There's so many ways you could translate that. Anochi being myself, like, why did I get myself into this? Or why are you punishing me? Or, you know what I'm saying? That isn't a simple question, and she ain't a simple lady. And Jacob, then we learn when he flees away, he's also not very simple. He has that dream, and there's a ladder going up and down, and he too is like, not really sure if he believes in God or not. I mean, there's so much there. So I think that she and Jacob are kindred spirits in their quest for better understanding their pain. And I do think she has some pain, and I'd love to know what you guys think about that.
And understanding her purpose, right? Both of them understanding their purpose, right? If so, why do I exist? Like that perennial question of, the existential question, why do I exist in this world, in this complex, crazy world where things are thrown at me? Why? Right? So she, in her struggle to understand her purpose in life, she passes that on to Jacob. Absolutely. I love that.
So I'll give you an idea that that's coming up. So lama se anochi, and then we see the word anochi later on in Vayetze, when he says Yesh Elohim b'makom haseh v'anochi lo yadati, there's God in this place, and I didn't know of this. And I think an interesting thing comes from a completely different word later on in the story of Jacob, that is the word katonti. And the reason I'm thinking about the word katonti comes from the word katan, and it has to do with little or small, and it's often traduced of little merit. Katonti mikol hachasadim umikol haemet shasit et avdecha. I am humble. I am somehow reduced by all the kindness and all the truth. Going back once again to the word truth that you have done with your servant. And I think that the word anochi comes in moments of blurriness and humility. And I think that like the word katonti comes this realization of and this clarity comes after Jacob wrestling with the angel and experiencing something that is transformative in his life. And when he's wrestling with the angel, I was in a class yesterday, in our seekers class, we're discussing this story, and when you see he, and at some point you don't know who is he, and maybe Jacob is looking at a mirror in that moment, and that angel is not a different entity, but something from within. And I think that those moments of self-realization, those moments of self-realization that come after doubt, those are the anochi moments. There are moments that lead to the humility of being able to connect with this moment, with the kindness and the truth of this moment.
It's so powerful. I mean, it's a beautiful. I mean, by the way, Esau uses the word anochi when he says, "Give me some of that red stuff." Ki ayef anochi. I'm famished, and maybe what that's saying is not like I'm hungry, but that I'll always be hungry. Meaning, it's almost as if he'll never be sated, no matter how much he gets to eat. That's an interesting way of looking at his thirst for game, as they say. But I wanted to share with you, because I know Vayetze, so foreshadowing next week, Nico, it's your favorite Parsha. The rabbi that did my bat mitzvah had a way of understanding, as the phrase that you shared, surely God was in this place and I did not know. You don't need the word anochi in that phrase. You could just say v'lo yadati, surely God was in this place and I did not know. And so his personal, understanding of this was God was in this place, but myself, anochi, myself, I did not know, which means if I don't know myself, then I don't know God. And that is such a deep way of understanding that. But I actually think that's true. We can't really have a connection with our divine unless we're working with the personal.
And let me just give you like a little word in what you just said, that Jacob finally says, when he meets Esau, after all these years, after all this conflict, I'm finally seeing the face of God.
Yes.
That's the moment in which
so beautiful.
He's finally present in his own life.
because he came together with his twin.
And he dug through all of the stuff from the generations past, and he was able to finally arrive.
Wow, Heather, what a beautiful way to wrap that up. That is such a lovely way to understand that story as real life metaphor. Thank you for that beautiful teaching.
Thank you.
Rabbis.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much for this conversation. What a wonderful way to go into Shabbos.
Yeah. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh
Chodesh
Tov.
Tov, Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.
Shabbat Shalom.